So just to give everybody a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today, first we're going to do the welcome introduction for new members. Then Jeff's going to do a land acknowledgement. We're going to set the community ground rules like we do every week. We'll have a little bit of time for community building and self-care, and then we'll actually get to our guest speaker today, who is Dr. Carolee Estelle. And then so that'll be about 45 minutes, and then we have about 15, 20 minutes for announcements and other items. And then we will wrap it up with another community building and self-care opportunity, and then we will adjourn. So that is what today looks like. So welcome everybody on behalf of the Dallas-Fort Worth Climate Reality chapter. My name is Alex. I will be facilitating today in the place of Richard, who is at his granddaughter's recital, right? In Austin, is his granddaughter's? Yeah. He is the one who normally facilitates these, so I will do my best to temporarily do this. But my name is Alex. I'm one of your co-vice chairs. Simon is the other co-vice chair, and Leah is our chapter chair. So hello, everybody. So I know, Linda, you talked earlier, but do you mind reintroducing yourself for the people who just logged on? And then after Linda, if you're a new member or just, visiting us today, feel free to unmute, turn on your camera if you want to, and say hi.
Well, hello. My name is Linda Knight, and I live on Wiley, actually outside of Wiley, and I have 5 acres. So I consider this my nature preserve. I have many critters and things, trees, and having a lovely time here. I previously lived for about 25 years in Houston, where I taught in the Houston ISD program, and also did a number of things across the state. So I'm a retired science teacher, and I am also an author and create curriculum materials. So I'm going to hold this up. I actually joined because I have a new graphic novel that we are trying out in the Los Angeles School District, and I'm very excited. The feedback is super positive. It's about electric vehicles and the whole infrastructure. So I am at the beginning of trying to find a way to get it out as far as possible into high schools. And I'm hoping that somehow through your organization, through our organization, since I've now managed to make myself a member, I'm hoping to find a way to figure out how to reach out to the right people to get it sponsored and get it promoted and get it in the schools where it really needs to be. So thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Linda. We'll need to connect you with our friends over at Greening Dallas ISD. I think they might be interested to hear about that for sure. And you're definitely in the right place. All right. Anybody else who is new or visiting who wants to introduce themselves? You don't have to turn off or turn on your camera unless you want to, but we would prefer to see your face.
I don't know if anyone else is new, but I am. I joined maybe this week. And so I got a call from Rebecca and got to chat with her a little bit. I'm located in Dallas. So I'm just excited to get to work with you all or just, learn more about this.
Awesome. Welcome. Yeah, Rebecca is great. Anybody else new, going once or wanted to say hi? Going twice? All righty, moving on. Jeff, you got the land acknowledgement?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Alex. In the DFW areas, we're standing and living on the lands stolen from the Kickapoo, Wichita, Tawakoni, Jumanos, and Comanche people who have been harmed yet continue to thrive in the process of colonization and white supremacy. I encourage all of us to go to nativeland.ca and educate ourselves on these native communities. Back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Can somebody drop the link for the, the land map?
Yeah, I'll
people
do
are interested. That. Drop that in the chat. Thank you. All righty, and now our chapter chair, Leah, will be setting the community ground rules as we do every week. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Alex. Let me share my screen. Are you guys seeing my screen? Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. Yes, thumbs up.
I see an otter. So
Oh, interesting. Give me 1 second.
they're
How
very
about this?
cute. There we go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just want to welcome new members. We have a couple here, which is really nice to have new faces and old faces as well. So every month when we start our chapter meeting, I just want to take a couple minutes to go through the community ground rule just as a reminder, not just for you, but also for myself. Okay, so the first one is to make space or take space. And when we're talking, just be mindful of the time. And the general rule of thumb is 2 minutes each time whenever we're talking. The second one is to speak from the I perspective instead of generalizing, and practice active listening and seek to understand. Assume good intentions and respect one another's space, time, and interest. Be willing to be uncomfortable, be open to productive discomfort. Intent does not negate impact. Disagree without discord. Personal attacks and labeling have no place in our chapter. And lastly, climate is a big issue, as a lot of the issues that we are dealing with in our society. So accept that there is no quick fix. All right. Thank you, guys. And back to you, Alex. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Leah. Alrighty, and next up we have our community building and self-care. We're going to take a couple minutes for that. Beth, our creatives chair, is going to be leading that, and I think she's also going to announce a meeting that they have this week if you're interested in our creatives group. So Beth, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, this beginning is actually under the heading of the climate creatives. What we have learned is that the community building and wellness and the creatives are doing similar things right now. So we're sort of merging. And speaking of the climate creatives, our next meeting is this Thursday. Our current theme is regenerating the soul and creative spirit as we are learning about regenerative practices of the earth. We are learning how to do that for ourselves. The meeting is for environmental activists as well as artists, so all are welcome. In each session, we are doing a process called wisdom wheeling, where ideas are sparked for our next creative project or our process of being environmentalists. Please do check us out, and we'll email and post the link for you. And now we will turn our focus to begin our session today. And this beginning happens by noticing the rhythmic nature of our breath. And by being aware of this rhythmic nature of breathing that is reflected in nature. The waves of the ocean coming in and coming out. Understanding that the trees also breathe and that we have a connection with the in and the out and what we mutually give each other. And focusing on the trees going deep into their roots and the connection that they have underneath the soil, a grand connection. And we're part of that. We're not separate from that. We are that. We are part of that. And as we feel that connection, we are mindful of all that is above us and the connection of the stars and the universe and the connection that is there. And we are part of that. Noticing the rhythmic nature of our breath, we allow ourselves to be present with each other and begin our time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That was great. And like Leah posted in the chat, They have the creatives meeting is this Thursday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. It'll be over Zoom, right, Beth?
Yes.
Yes, it's over Zoom. So feel free after you get off work or from wherever you are to log on and enjoy that time spent together. All righty. Let me see here. All right, so now we're going to get to our guest speaker. Dr. Estelle, if you want to turn your camera on, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. So Dr. Carolee Estelle is my colleague over at UT Southwestern. I actually met her when we were both guest lecturers for a elective for first year medical students on climate change and human health. And I got the privilege to listen to her talk about some local issues related to climate change and health, and was just blown away by her lecture. So I was like, please come talk to our group. And she so graciously accepted. So we're excited to have her here today. The title of the presentation is Environmental and Climate Equity, a Local Perspective. The description is the most recent IPCC report highlighted that some of the countries and regions of the world that contribute the least to global climate change will suffer the greatest negative impact in terms of excess deaths, extreme heat and weather events, and displacement. On the global stage, the United States will be among the climate privileged, but we will explore how this privilege will not be experienced equally around the country and or even at our local DFW microenvironment. And then a little bit about Dr. Estelle is that she is a faculty physician in the Division of Infectious Diseases and Geographic Medicine at UT Southwestern Medical Center. And she serves as the Associate Chief of Healthcare Epidemiology at Parkland Health System, where she helped lead the COVID-19 pandemic response, as well as the Hurricane Harvey Mega Shelter Medical Clinic in 2017. We are so excited to have her today. This is going to be great. So sit back, relax, and Dr. Estelle, it is over to you. I think you're still muted. We are working on it.
There we go. All right, thank you.
There we go.
I was having
Perfect.
trouble getting my mouse when it's in presentation mode. I struggle to keep track of the chat while I'm in presentation mode. So just direct your questions to me or afterwards. And thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction, but also to your group. This is a really big honor for me, as you guys are the ones doing this hard work. And so I feel a little bit not qualified to present to you all. And this is the presentation that I put together for our medical students, as she talked about, which is really an introductory course to get them learning and thinking about these issues, particularly as they relate to health. My lecture is going to be on the equity issues that plague our environmental and climate problems going forward, and particularly at the local perspective. But first, we look through the sort of big picture is that in our IPCC 2022, which posted like 3 days before the lecture I gave before, so I only managed to make it through 250 pages of it. And while I intended to read more, I did not. In addition to addressing the current and future impacts of climate change, the report also touched on climate and environmental equity issues and how they must be addressed on the global scale in order to reach higher climate resilience and adaptation. And I think it's important that IPCC included this in their model, because if we leave huge swaths of our global community behind, even actually really our local communities behind, we won't be able to reach the higher spectrum of the mitigation and adaptation goals toward resilience. And while leaving the environmentally disadvantaged communities behind won't stop us from landing somewhere in the middle where we will survive, it will likely severely deepen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And if we don't stop the 1.5 to 2 degree warming, an additional 65 million will be exposed to exceptionally extreme heat waves every 5 years. 3 billion people will live in areas with water scarcity, and an additional 9 million annual deaths from climate-related illnesses by 2100 compared to 1961 and 1990. Sorry, problems with my slides here. But those impacts won't be felt equally. Regions that contribute the least to the problem will suffer some of the harshest consequences. In this figure from the IPCC report, they're representing some of the observed global and regional impacts on ecosystems and human systems attributed to climate change, and also the level of confidence in assertion or that attribution by the color. The minus signs representing the increasingly adverse impacts. As you can see, for the US, or for us in Europe and North America, there are many negative impacts with higher levels of certainty, but there are also a number of systems that won't be so adversely impacted, which is represented by those plus minus signs. But if you compare that to the African continent and small islands, in every single system, they are expected to have negative impacts, though the certainty levels for each of these vary more significantly. In addition to Africa and small island states, South Asia and Central America will also be disproportionately negatively impacted. While African countries have contributed less than 3% of cumulative global emissions, they are projected to experience more than 50% of the excess deaths from climate-related illness. In part because based on worst case scenario, warming there would increase extreme heat exposure to 118 times historical levels. While in Europe, these heat exposures would only increase by 4-fold. Even moderate scenarios for sea level rise would risk inundating coastlines where roughly 90% of all Pacific Islanders live. And at high levels of warming, small island states and some tropical regions will hit limits on their ability to adapt to flooding and extreme heat. So across these climate disadvantaged continents and regions, 31 to 143 million people are projected to potentially become displaced. In addition to these disproportionate negative consequences, currently, it's been found that 3.8% of funding from climate research has gone to projects focused on Africa over the last 30 years. So access to climate financial support for adaptation measures is also inequitably distributed, which, if not rectified, will make it very difficult to mitigate harm in these regions. And once again, will contribute to the increasingly widening gaps between richer and poorer regions of the world. While the US is one of the major contributors to emissions that will feel a fraction of the negative impact felt by other nations in Africa, South America, South Asia, and small islands, we will still see similarly inequitable impacts play out across the US. For us, poor air quality is our biggest problem. It's the most significant environmental health risk we face in the US. Fine particulate matter is especially harmful and is responsible for more than 1,000 deaths per year. Across the US, people of color are exposed to more air pollution than whites, according to studies by the EPA. And with 40% of Americans, or more than 135 million people, currently living in areas with unhealthy levels of ozone or particle pollution, people of color are more than 3 times more likely to be in those areas with the most polluted air levels compared to white people. Researchers have been able to quantify this, and these are some of the definitions that we'll need for some of the upcoming figures that we're going to walk through. So pollution inequity is the difference between, for these authors in what we'll discuss with this study, is the difference between the environmental health damage caused by a racial ethnic group and the damage of pollution that that group experiences. A pollution burden is a group that experiences more pollution exposure than caused by their consumption. Pollution advantage is a group who experiences less air pollution exposure rather caused by their consumption. So this figure, I know that it's a lot, but I'm going to try to break it down because I think it's a very meaningful figure. This figure represents the PM 2.5, or that fine particulate matter concentrations that are resulting from emissions from each emitter group, which is the maps on the left, and the relationships among the PM 2.5 health impacts as attributed to the emitters in the left bar, the end users, the middle bar, and the end uses, which is the middle bar, and the end users, which is the right bar. The blue connecting lines show the relationship among emitters, end users, and end uses. I'm going to try not to mix that up in the future because it's important to distinguish them. End uses and end users. And in the thickness of that blue connecting line is a representation of the quantity or the proportion of those contributions. Of note, connecting lines representing less than 1,000 deaths are not shown in this figure. So the height of the bar on the left shows the number of PM 2.5 attributable premature death caused by the physical production of emissions from each group of emitters. And the biggest emitter there is biogenic wildfire and industrial emissions contribute to the greatest proportion of premature deaths caused by emissions in the US, and number, really, this is quantified in this number. The left, you can see the scale 0 to it's 130,000 deaths. So, and the height of the middle bar shows the number of deaths caused by the demand for each group of the end uses. So shelter, the large end user is the large end user contributor to death and contributes by way of residential wood combustion and gas, off-highway, industrial, and construction emitters. The height of the bar on the right shows the number of deaths caused by different types of end users. So populations who were classified as white or other used the most shelter and transportation, but also food, goods, and services, whose uses contribute to emissions coming predominantly from the industrial, agricultural, construction, and coal utility-based emissions. I think this is a very powerful figure. And this one shows the average PM 2.5 exposure experienced and caused by racial ethnic groups. Each group of bars shows the emitters, which is A, and the end uses, which are responsible for the exposure, which is B. And then the gray connecting line showing the relationship among the emitters and end uses. Pollution inequity is the percent difference between the group's exposed bar and their caused bar. These researchers found that PM 2.5, or that fine particulate matter pollution, is disproportionately caused by the consumption of goods and services by the non-Hispanic white majority, but disproportionately inhaled by Black and Hispanic minorities, giving the non-Hispanic white population a pollution advantage of approximately 17% less pollution exposure than caused by their consumption. And on average, Blacks are exposed to about 56% more particulate matter pollution than is caused by their consumption. And for Hispanics, it's higher at 63%. Again, these figures are again just to highlight that what is and will be seen on the global scale is also being seen within the US in terms of the largest emission contributors experiencing the least of its harms. Figure A shows the percent pollution inequity, which with each group's contributions in white and their exposure in the color component of their bar. Figure B shows the exposure of each group to total combined consumption of all groups in the solid line, and the exposure caused by each group's population adjusted consumption in the dotted line. Figure C shows the percent pollution inequity levels of each group over time. And as you can see, has marginally improved over time for Black populations, but worsened for Hispanic populations in the early 2000s, and it's not really abated. One of the major mechanisms for this pollution inequity is that the proximity of residents to a facility that is emitting PM 2.5 significantly contributes to their exposure, and sources of pollution are often placed closer to minority communities. Non-white communities are much more likely to be within 2.5 miles of a refinery or factory and be exposed to higher levels of fine particle pollution. In every state except for New Mexico, North Dakota, Maryland, Virginia, and DC, communities of color are exposed to more environmental pollution than white communities. And this is from the article that we just, where the data that we just went over came from. And then a study by the NAACP separately in 2012 ranked all 378 coal-powered plants in the US, and they found the 6 million people living within 3 miles of those plants had an average income of $18,000 a year, and 39% of them were people of color. But then when they looked at the 75 of those plants that received a failing grade, because they were responsible for 14% of the emissions from all US plants combined, the 4 million people living within the 3 miles of those 75 plants have an average income of $17,000 a year, and 53% are minorities. So using the 2011 National Emissions Inventory and American Community Survey from 2000 to 2013, this figure illustrates the population-wide distribution of absolute PM 2.5 burden caused specifically by emissions from nearby facilities for the overall population, as well as for several subgroups. Across the distribution, the gap in burden between those above and those below the poverty line is smaller than the gap between whites and non-whites. So that racial impact is greater than the poverty impact. At the 50th percentile, whites have an absolute PM 2.5 burden below 0.1 tons per year, which is more than an order of magnitude below the burden of any of their non-white counterparts. And at the 80th percentile, the absolute burden for whites is less than half the absolute burden for equivalent non-whites. And this figure is, we're not going to go through it in detail. It's really just meant to show the data that's behind the following statement, that the non-whites and those living in poverty face a disproportionate burden from particulate matter emitting facilities. And Blacks in particular are likely to live in high emissions areas with an average PM 2.5 burden for Black populations being 1.54 times that of the population overall. And again, it's that the racial disparity is larger than the poverty-based disparity, which has a 1.35 times the overall population average exposure and burden. And this figure really is just to look at the absolute PM 2.5 emissions burden by RUCA code and stratified by race, ethnicity, and then poverty status. And RUCA stands for the rural urban commuting area. And it's broken down into 1 through 3, which are the metropolitan core, 4 to 6, which is the micropolitan core, 7 to 9, which is small town core, and then 10, which is rural. And that's on the horizontal axis. The US Department of Agriculture is the one who defines and assigns these RUCA codes. The dashed line indicates the mean average burden for all groups in the United States, and the US Census Bureau for 2013 set the poverty level. As you can see, the exposure of Black populations in the green bar for each of these RUCA codes in their exposure to emissions from nearby facilities, because again, this study is particularly about communities with nearby facilities, surpasses all other groups, including those below the poverty line in every RUCA code, except for codes 3 and 9, which are both low commuter areas. I don't know what that really specifically indicates, but in all of the RUCA codes, in terms of are we in urban, suburban, small town, and rural, the Black populations in all of those different various types of areas are getting more of the facility generated emissions than other populations. So it's not just because a lot of Black people live in metropolitan areas where we have high industrial. It's also when we find those Black communities in rural areas and other types of areas as well. So moving on to extreme weather. Increased extreme events like heat waves and hurricanes are expected. Many communities of color live in low-lying areas more prone to flooding. Currently, counties with large Black populations are exposed to 2 to 3 times more extreme heat days per year on average compared to counties with fewer Black populations. And by mid-century, extreme heat days estimated to increase by more than 20 times. Regarding heat-related mortality, heat can either be the primary factor of death, or like heat stroke, or it could be from an underlying reason. Individuals with pre-existing medical conditions, particularly cardiovascular and respiratory disease, are at higher risk for mortality during peak periods of high and/or prolonged heat. And in a study of 9 counties in California, each 10-degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature throughout the day corresponded to a 2.3% increase in mortality. And by the end of the century, researchers project that 150,000 additional heat-related deaths among the 40 largest US cities will occur. And this includes Dallas. We are in those cities. So as we move to Texas, and even our local DFW area, we will walk through some of the ways that these environmental and climate inequities exist here. According to the American Lung Association, American Lung Association and their State of the Air report card, the DFW area is ranked 17 out of 226 metropolitan areas for its high ozone days. It's ranked 42 out of 216 metropolitan areas for the 24-hour particle pollution, and ranked 50 out of almost 200 metro areas for the annual particle pollution. So it makes it no surprise that 9.5% of Dallas ISD students has asthma. And the national average comparatively is 8.3%. Dallas County also leads the region for hospitalizations for childhood asthma. These are not things to be proud of. According to a study by the Nature Conservancy, children of North Texas have higher asthma rates than the rest of the country. Rates get worse depending on the socioeconomic and racial makeup of a school. And that's evidenced by the fact that of the 18 Dallas schools where more than 17% of the students have asthma, all but 2 were in low-income, predominantly minority neighborhoods south of I-30. And this really is just showing that Dallas community emissions source contributions, and much like the US, at the US average, the majority of our contributions are from commercial and transportation or other mobile sources. Where we differ from the US average is that we have a smaller contribution from industrial energy emission, and have a greater contribution from our residential energy emissions. And I'm, this is again preaching to the choir, so I'm sure you are all aware that zip code matters. And in the city of Dallas, there is a 15-year difference in life expectancy depending on the zip code you're from. Nearly 300 industrial sites emit pollution in Black and Latino communities in Dallas. And in West Dallas, it's estimated that 0.03 tons of air pollution per person per year. When you go to Yoba, which is a section of the city that was settled by formerly enslaved people in 1872, it's estimated at 0.42 tons of air pollution per person per year. And then when you go to Flora Farms, it's estimated 4.48 tons of air pollution per person per year. In District 8, where particulate matter is highest, the life expectancy in one of its zip codes is 70.8 years overall, with 76.5 for women and 66.3 for men. But then in University Park, the life expectancy is 82 overall, 83.6 for women and 80 for men. How does this happen? Well, nearly all permitted polluters in Dallas are in minority neighborhoods. This map shows communities of color in pink and white communities in orange. The black dots representing facilities with air pollution permits. As you can see, these dots cluster in and around communities of color and are conspicuously absent from majority white neighborhoods. Also highlighted on this map is Joba, one of the Black communities that we mentioned previously, and Shingle Mountain, which we will briefly discuss shortly. This figure overlies the industrial zoning and population demographics. As you can see, the areas with the lowest percent white population in red and peach, i.e. the highest minority populations, contain all of the industrial districts, including industrial research and industrial manufacturing districts. When we put this map next to the map that Dallas created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1937, one of the preeminent redlining maps, to denote which areas are too risky to loan money to, we can see the riskiest areas in 1937 are today where those industrial zoning neighborhoods of color are, and zoning areas and neighborhoods of color coexist. In West Dallas, zip code 75212 has the largest amount of permitted air pollution in Dallas. Of the greater than 26,000 people living there, a quarter of them live below the poverty line, and most are Hispanic and or Black. Magellan Distributing Facility, Dallas Woodcraft, GAF, and Motiva Dallas Terminal are some of the biggest polluters in the zip code. In 2019, the GAF plant was the top emitter of sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and 2 inhalable particulate matter, and among the major facilities in Dallas County. And the GAF site was established before permit requirements were set, so they are currently operating without a permit, but this is by exception and allowed. And similar situations like this have allowed for a lead smelter and Shingle Mountain to persist in marginalized communities in Dallas. And this is just in the news, and I'm not going to harp on this too long because I know you guys probably know way more about this than I do. Shingle Mountain, which is in South Dallas, was an illegal toxic waste dump of roofing shingles on the edge of a residential neighborhood that spanned for more than a city block and reached a height of a 6-story building. And local officials had really let this persist until really very recently. And the neighborhood in Dallas has been zoned for industrial rail yards, chemical plants, concrete mixing facilities, and warehouses for years. And up to 100 diesel trucks per day traffic through this area. In 2017, 2 businessmen began redirecting their trucks hauling shingles to a vacant lot in this neighborhood and created a recycling operation to ground these shingles into dust in this neighborhood. It continued for 2 years before local officials acknowledged it as a problem and began rectifying it, but only after significant advocacy and persistence from local residents. I also wanted to add an update. I don't have a specific slide for it. I didn't get enough time to create it. and I'm sure you all have already been made aware of this, but work and studies led by local environmental groups, such as you guys, have identified that this land where Shingle Mountain was has more than 3 times the level of safe lead levels in the soil. And it's actually really residual from decades of industrial zoning and many different versions of these types of Shingle Mountain that have accumulated over the years. Work is being done now, whether I'm not 100% sure if you guys are contributing to it, but I know there's groups that are working toward those, they're working to mitigate, putting in those procedures to mitigate the lead in the soil. But what also still needs to occur is the monitoring of those populations and of those people for that lead poisoning. So back to climate. Climate change in cities. So climate change in cities is driven by 2 phenomena, and I'm not going to talk about the definitions on the slide. I did that for the students. I know you guys know. But the warming trends reported by climate science often do not reflect the impact of the urban heat island effect. And the magnitude of warming that urban populations are confronting is profoundly underestimated because of the urban heat island effect. Research focused on the extent to which the global greenhouse effect and urban heat island effect contribute to warming in large US cities, including Dallas, finds the urban heat island effect to play a more significant role in warming trends since the 1960s. And in some cities, waste heat from energy consumption has been estimated to account for approximately 1/3 of our heat island effect. So we'll talk about these urban heat islands a little bit. And again, because I know you guys are much more familiar with this than the students, I'll be very brief here. For most large cities of the US, urban zones are warming at twice of the rate of rural zones and at about twice the rate of the planet as a whole. And this figure supports that claim. A study was conducted in 2017 for Dallas urban heat island management. And so this study assessed the extent to which Dallas area is warming due to urban development and deforestation, and estimated the extent to which rising temperatures are impacting public health, as well as provided a scientific foundation for the development of urban heat management plans and programs. And the data that they used for this was generated from more than 4,000 points across the city. And it modeled heat exposure and the potential impact from various heat management strategies. And so I'm going to talk about the findings from that. So they found that in Dallas, more than 35% of Dallas is made up of more. Why can I not say the sentence? I'm sorry. Greater than 35% of Dallas is made up of impervious surfaces like rooftops, parking lots, and highways. Currently, the 23,000 parkland acres and the Trinity Forest, they don't provide enough shade to lower the ambient air temperature and mitigate the urban heat island effect that we have. The area retains heat in buildings and pavement and is up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than rural areas with more trees and open space. And the hottest days of Dallas had an average high of 101 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 80 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 months of the year. And Dallas heat-related deaths peaked in 2011 at 52 in that year. The drivers of the urban heat island effect, again, require loss of natural vegetation, introduction of urban construction materials more efficient at absorbing and storing thermal energy than they are than natural landscape is. High density urban morphology traps the solar radiation. It's like the tall buildings, and then emission of waste heat from buildings and vehicles. So strategies to mitigate heat island effects. trees and vegetation, whether that be preservation or planting. A 40% increase in urban tree cover decreased air temperature by 1.8 to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, with some areas even having reductions of greater than 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, this is data from that study in 2017. Engineering of roofing and surface paving materials to reflect incoming solar radiation is another strategy. Surface temperatures on green roofs can be up to 90 degrees cooler than conventional roofs during the summer. Another strategy is to redesign built environment to increase area surface water and wind ventilation. So if we have a solution, what's the problem? Well, this legacy of redlining that has led to the restricting of our minority housing to increasingly industrialized zones has also impacted where mitigation strategies such as green canopy have been implemented. This is a current map of Dallas depicting the predominant race in each area. So you've got yellow is the Black communities, green is the Hispanic, non-white or Hispanic, and then the brown is the non-Hispanic white, and a purple is Asian communities. This map, which I showed you earlier, is the 1937 map of Dallas. It was created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And just briefly, during the Great Depression, different areas of the city, they were graded according to how risky it was to lend to people in that area. A grade of A in green represented the best type of community to lend to, while loans and mortgages to people in areas marked D or purple were considered hazardous and high risk. In reality, these maps often were certain maps were given a hazardous rating to areas very arbitrarily based on areas that had high non-white populations. This practice is well known as redlining and was common in that time. And then it impacted the investments and policy making that ultimately would frequently divert resources away from Black and other marginalized communities. And then it just reinforced these cycles of inequity. And the impacts of redlining are still felt in marginalized communities today. This map overlays the tree cover, the little green dots, over on top of our neighborhood demographic map. Again, Black communities in yellow, Hispanic, green, brown, white, purple, Asian. And you can see the tree cover in predominantly white neighborhoods of North Dallas compared to the predominantly Black neighborhoods and Black and Hispanic neighborhoods of West Dallas. South Dallas has quite a bit of tree cover, naturally, partly from the park. This map shows overlays the 1937 lone risk redline map with the tree cover, and shows that the A and B grade communities, as designated in 1937, which are concentrated in the northern part of Dallas, appeared to have fairly robust canopy. And neighborhoods that were deemed hazardous in 1937 have lower percentages of tree cover today. And this one overlays the 1937 risk map and the current city demographics. And you can see that those past policies have a legacy in the present. Once again, a map here. This time we're overlaying the tree canopy and the heat islands. And there appear to be fewer heat islands in the northern Dallas area where there is a lot of green canopy. And then if we put the heat island map on top of the demographic map, you can see that the predominantly white neighborhoods are frequently spared from the heat island effects, and our communities of Black, Hispanic, and even Asian up there in the Northwest populations are heavily affected by heat islands. And this map shows that the areas that were given grades of A and B in 1937, such as the Highland Park area, do not have a high presence of heat islands. On the other hand, areas that were given the rating of C and D, such as East and West Dallas, contain an abundance of intense heat islands. In reality, this is not the complete story, though, as the Dallas Urban Heat Island Management Study found that in many of Dallas's south and southwest neighborhoods, that do have a fair amount of old trees, that this heat island effect is still occurring because of high contributions of impervious surfaces in spite of all of the trees that are there. So their modeling has suggested that tree planting or preservation alone in these neighborhoods would not have significant impact, which really just means we're going to have other solutions for these areas, and we need to be looking at and working on that. So why does heat island matter? So in this figure is really just showing the days per year with the heat index above 100, and its projections by this research group. And so in Dallas County, our historical number of days per year above 100 historically was 31. If we are slow to take action by mid-century, that will be 83 days. If we don't take action at all by mid-century, that'll be 93 days. Whereas by late century, if we're slow to take action, it'll be 90 days above 100. And if we don't take any action, it'll be by late century, it will be 124 days of the year above 100. But if we do take action, then we will keep it to 83. So back to heat-related illness. So heat exhaustion, and this is a little bit for our med students to teach them a little bit about that. Heat exhaustion includes nausea, muscle cramps, fatigue, and dizziness. Heat stroke is when our core body temperature is more than 103 Fahrenheit with intense nausea, headache, dizziness, and unconsciousness. Death can occur if the body temp is not reduced and fluids are not replaced. And heat-related mortality, by primary or secondary from exacerbation of underlying medical conditions. In 2011, 112 residents of the city of Dallas were estimated to have died from a heat-related cause, of which 50% were attributed to be a product of the region's heat island itself, and many were persons of color. An analysis of federal data on worker heat deaths shows that Texas tally has nearly doubled in the last 10 years compared to the previous decade.
And you have about 4 minutes left, Dr. Estelle.
Okay. So the 1995 Chicago heat wave, which lasted 5 days in July, resulted in more than 700 heat-related deaths. And these global and regional temperature projections are going to be considered to contribute more each year. Other local heat impacts on our community is it can be a deterrent, and any community really is. It can be a deterrent to outdoor activity, work schedules for those who have outdoor occupations. And again, the young, medically ill, and low income are more heavily impacted. This is from the an assessment taken in 2018 of really just talking about the equity concerns on our communities of color as one of the at-risk populations, but also our older populations, low income, and children. So the Dallas impacts of climate change, similar on cost of living, higher heating and cooling costs for homes and businesses, especially feeling this right now with all of the inflation issues. And public health, there's more heat-related problems, higher incidences of respiratory illness, an increase in vector-borne illnesses. That's in another word for a type of infectious diseases. And public safety, increased property damage from severe weather, decreased water access and water quality, and infrastructure damage. And then food security, food costs and the availability of impacted by climate-related agricultural issues. And this comes, this figure and this information comes from the City of Dallas Environmental Climate Planning Efforts documents. So this is just to say thank you again. We open this to questions, and here, in addition to the sources that were listed on each slide, these are additional sources that I used to compile this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Estelle. That was great. We have about 7-8 minutes for questions, everyone. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom. If you can't figure it out, that's okay. You can just unmute. But yeah, I don't think we've had any questions in the chat so far, but we've all kind of been talking about it and posting relevant resources. I was trying to find your sources as you were talking about them and post those. So if anybody's interested in those are there as well. But if anybody has any questions, go for it.
Okay, I unmuted. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. I have a question about and to point out the vector-borne illnesses are increasing exponentially, especially for those who do work outside. The medical community is not even aware of it, or just, blows it off. For example, May is Lyme disease awareness month, and the CDC they don't even acknowledge it. And if you're looking at a pandemic like COVID, we also have a pandemic called Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, and this has a lot to do with global trade and the heating of the environment. I just want to point that out, and also understanding the vectors that move it. A changing vector, everybody thinks that it's deer, but it's actually mice who have a symbiotic relationship to the bacteria, a lot of migrating birds, and then a lot of international shipping. So anyway, much like the plague was spread during the Middle Ages and on, we're dealing with a very similar factor. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for those comments. And it's very true. It's not that no one in the medical community understands it. I'd say my infectious diseases colleagues are much more aware of it, but it isn't in our mainstream medical education curriculum. And that's why Dr. Anusha Govind, my infectious diseases colleague, created the first course of its kind at UT Southwestern School of Medicine, which is how I met Alex. She gave one of those lectures, and then that's why I did this lecture. I do a lot of the DEI work at UT Southwestern, which is why I was kind of asked to do this section. Truth be told, the reason I'm sort of self-conscious about this is I have not contributed to the solution of this. I do infection prevention, healthcare epidemiology. We generate a lot of waste for the purposes of decreasing transmission of infections, which is a totally different issue. But over the course of the last few years, I'd say of increasing community knowledge about these issues is how I learned about things like Shingle Mountain, which is all I did was say, hey, Anusha, you're starting this new class. You should have someone present on the local issues like Shingle Mountain that are going on. And then she said, well, you do it. And then because of that, I met Alex. Now Alex has sent me invitations to a number of events. And now I've even found one of our nurses in the clinic who's on the commission for District 8. And we're going to try to work on some issues related to the lead levels under Shingle Mountain's area. So, I think, so what's happening is, and what has to happen first is we do have to increase that awareness, and things like this course and the work that you all do is part of that, so that we can get more people working on it, in particularly in the health sector.
For sure. Dr. Estelle, get with me later. I know I have some connections with the people working on the Shingle Mountain stuff from like the justice side that I can connect you with if you want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure.
Can I rebut just quick? You said you don't have much information about that. That's the real issue inside the medical community. And they have to wear, and they simply aren't. And, just like maybe now long haul COVID and actually long haul Lyme disease are starting to work together because they're very similar. However, being ignorant of a problem and ignoring the existence of the problem doesn't mean it's going to go away. It's just going to grow. That's where I'm, very, I'll say upset and very just turned off by the whole medical community when they're not looking at actual science. And I'll shut up. Thanks.
Thank
Can I
you,
ask a
John. Yeah.
question? Yeah.
Yeah.
may
All
I
right.
ask a question?
Simon first and then you, Linda. Okay. Simon's had
Okay.
his hand up for a while. And then we have, try and keep them quick. We have about 3 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm not really sure exactly how to phrase this as a question. So I'm just going to kind of like dump what I'm thinking. Dr. Estelle, earlier you were talking about fine particulate matter, and I was thinking about that as really just like a widespread environmental thing that so many people are exposed to just in the process of living.
Mm-hmm.
And about how that's really, I think, creating some underlying conditions long term.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so really my question is like, how is that potentially playing out? Because this isn't something where someone has a job that puts them into situations like this, like we would see with like coal miners. This is people just like living. So are there like projections about how that's going to impact like health costs, public health, et cetera?
Yes, that's an excellent frame. So yes, existing in the world today, you are exposed to this particulate matter and the damaging causes of that. And what we walked through with this talk was the disproportionate manner that those exposures will occur because of the legacy policies, redlining and districting and restricting certain groups of people into the areas where the highest amounts of that pollution occurs. And therefore, because of that, that's why Dallas and then certain people and communities have much higher rates of asthma as one of the bigger issues than other areas. And that's where that data came in with certain regions have the highest levels of hospitalizations from asthma, and our children in the Dallas ISD, which is much higher rates of these communities, have much more asthma. And so it does have a impact overall on healthcare spending. Now, I didn't specifically look to find what that number is, right? And what that could be mitigated to if we made an impact. And so I'm not particularly sure if someone has specifically done it yet. I imagine they probably have, but it is interesting. It would be an impactful number to evaluate.
Okay, so I can see, I think we're going to have more questions than I thought we would have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the schedule just a little bit. So we're going to keep doing Q&A, and then we're going to move into announcements for actions. And then after that, we'll do like chapter announcements and updates. So everybody, please stick around if you can, but we're going to keep doing Q&A until about 11:10, 11:15-ish. So Linda, you're up.
I told you I live in Wiley, and everything out this direction east of Dallas is sprouting subdivisions and all kinds of things. So we're losing the green canopy right and left. It's terrible. The subdivision people have gotten the message that they need to put in as a protection. They need to have retention ponds for the water issues. Is there anything afoot that will add a layer of, when they build these houses, 6 feet apart, no room for anything, it's just ridiculous. Is there any effort being made to put in a requirement that they have to put in something to deal with the heat island effect?
Truthfully, I think Alex might have a better answer for this. My understanding is that there is work being done on that. I think the issue is that it may be being done to a greater degree in certain areas and neighborhoods than in others. And so that the data that I got all that canopy information on, that group is working, and others obviously are working on increasing and improving the canopy. And I think part of that is, when we construct new stuff, keeping that in mind and working on that. I don't know that it's fully realized, as you point out in an observation and practice.
Yeah, I apologize. I was looking at the schedule and trying to work some things out. Was the question related to increasing tree canopy coverage?
Yes, so
sorry.
she was talking about with new neighborhoods as they're sprouting up, and they're high density neighborhoods that are being built, homes very close together. Are there any groups or projects or anything trying to improve the way those are planned to account for increasing canopy and reducing heat island effect in new construction?
Okay, yeah, I can definitely. I've been doing research projects related to working with the Texas Trees Foundation. So the answer is yes, probably not as well as it could be. So the Texas Trees Foundation is trying to increase tree canopy coverage, especially in the Dallas area. The city of Dallas actually has in their comprehensive environmental action plan, the CCAP that we've talked about, which, Linda, if you go to our website, I think you can find more information about that, or we'll do a lecture about it at some point. But they are actually trying to increase the city of Dallas's tree canopy coverage to, I think it's 30% in 2030 and then 40% by 2050. I might be wrong, but they are trying to increase like Dallas's tree canopy. But the issue is that there's a lot of stuff happening. There are actions happening with local city governments. I know Plano and I think Frisco are also looking at these things. I'm not sure about any other cities, but the issue is I don't know if there's a lot of communication happening between developers and then the city government. So that could be something that we visit in the future. If you are interested in tree canopy coverage stuff, I'm doing a lot of research related to mental health and medical stuff on that side. So you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll post my email in the chat in just a second. So answer is yes, but probably not as good as it needs to be. I think, Michael, I know you unmuted. Did you have a question? Then Jayashri?
I was just going to add something. Y'all were talking about this, but the Planetary Health Coalition is an organization of 300 medical groups, medical education schools, UN, et cetera, globally. And those of you who are interested in health should join it. And it does a lot of work on standard setting and education. So I'd recommend the Planetary Health Alliance, and I put it in the chat.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. And also, Dr. Estelle, before I forget, I see Jashri's comment in the chat. Can your contact information be shared for future? Or do you have a contact you prefer?
Yeah, I'll put it in.
Thank you. All right, Jashri, what's your question?
Thank you for giving me this wonderful talk, Dr. Estelle. I really loved it, and especially because I found a lot of data referring to Dallas-Fort Worth area that I was trying to look up but could not. I have been writing op-eds recently, and so I am trying to write on something that is local, like that I can express our opinion, our collective opinion on this and get people's attention. So that's why I wanted to get your contact so that I can talk to you, whatever data or reference you can give me, so that make my article more argument, like solid arguments. So
absolutely. Just reach out. I put my email in the chat.
Thank you so much. And it was a lovely talk.
Yeah, thank you.
It was for sure. Thank you. All right. Do we have any more questions? We have time for about one more brief question or comment, I guess. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Estelle. You're welcome to stick around. I am about to do an announcement about, not Shingle Mountain, the GAF manufacturing plant in just a second, and Singleton United. So I'll talk about that real quick, and then we'll move into some more like chapter specific stuff, and then you're welcome to leave. But thank you for your time so far. So related, oh yeah, thank you. Okay, So related, so you all heard that Dr. Estelle was talking about the issue with air pollution, especially in the Dallas area and especially in West Dallas, zip code 75212, I believe. So if you've been to previous meetings, we've talked about our joining with the campaign GAF's Gotta Go, which is part of Singleton United Unidos. So what they are is that they are Singleton United Unidos is a neighborhood coalition on the Singleton Boulevard, which is right across from the GAF asphalt manufacturing factory. You heard Dr. Estelle talk about that briefly, but long story short, it is a big source of pollution in that community. It is literally right across from these houses. There is a high school less than like probably 500 yards from this facility. It's ridiculous. And the issue is that that facility has been there since 1946, but related to redlining and some other policy issues, there are a lot of houses in that area as well, even though it is zoned industrial usage. So it really puts these members of this community at a disadvantage. And long story short, GAF is not up to code because it was grandfathered in. And so long story short, that means that it doesn't really need to reduce its pollution or work on anything related to pollution. It can kind of keep doing whatever it wants to do. And so Singleton United has created this campaign called GAF's Gotta Go, which we, Climate Reality DFW, are taking part of. And they just released their report asking the city government or the city council to officially amortize GAF, which essentially means shutting it down because it is a non-conforming land use. And so they're asking us because they need our help. And as campaign members, I told them we would be fully on board with supporting them. So what this means for you as an individual chapter member is that it's time to contact our city council representatives, which we absolutely love to do. So if you live in Dallas, if you work in Dallas, or even if you don't, we need to contact city council members because they need at least 5 signatures on this amortization plan in order to move it forward to the Board of Adjustments, which then starts the process of eventually getting this plant shut down. And just because I know some people will probably bring up jobs and how important the GAF plant is for jobs, nobody in 75212 is employed by this plant. It is all outsiders. So there are issues with that as well. So this plant is not good for the community at all. And so we need you to contact your city government representative, your Dallas council representative rather, especially if you live or work in District 6, because that is the district that the plant is in. The representative there is Omar Narvaez. But also I know UT Southwestern is in District 2, which is right next to that. So I will be contacting, I forget the name of that representative, but long story short, I'll be dropping some resources, and thank you, Leah. She's been posting more in the chat about if you want to learn more about GAF's Gotta Go. I'll be posting about contacting your city council representative. And then if you are not sure what to say to them or not sure who to even email, I'll be sending out a chapter email probably this week that will have some, wording that you could borrow for sending an email to them or to call them on the phone as well. So keep an eye out for that. If you're not subscribed to our emails, or if you haven't noticed them recently, check your spam because a lot of times they go to spam, but just keep an eye out for that this week. And so with that in mind, we are going to now move into, I believe, so as far as the rest of the meeting goes, Joshua is going to give us an update on reimbursement forms and the process for that. Leah will be talking about fundraising. Roger's got some really great announcements about new members. And then I will also be doing a legislation update on some new bills that are attempting to be passed at the national level. So please stick around if you're able to, but Joshua, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Can you let me share my screen?
I believe sharing screen's already enabled, so you should be able to, right, guys?
Okay, got it. Can everyone see this? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the reason I brought this forward because all of us are volunteer workers, and simply for lack of understanding of the process, sometimes it takes your time and my time, a lot more of time and effort to get a simple thing done, which is get the money and to either reimburse it or to spend it on the. So I thought I requested, and thank you for granting me this. Okay, why is it not moving? Alex, how do I move to the next slide?
I think you might just click it because I think you have it just open in editing mode, so you can just click it.
Okay, so here is a quick thing of how our, all of you know that our chapter is volunteer based. So all our work and time, every one of us gives it free. The fund that we need is for subscriptions, like for Zoom that we are using, or for the website that we are hosting. All those require money. They don't give us free. So for that, we raise money by fundraising, donations. Now those donations does belong to us, but it's not a single cent is in our hands. It directly goes to the national office, and that's managed by professionals. Money always is very complicated stuff. All I do is request once we have enough money for anything, and then once the money is granted, then how it is expended and how you are paid back. So for that, if it is a reimbursement, supposing we are in a hurry and you spent money on your own and you want it to be paid back to you, then there are two forms you need to fill out. One is the national office that provides me. Based on that, they will send you the check. And the other one is a Google form that I maintain as our internal audit, like internal records, you can say, so that we are humans, we might forget. When I hand over my duties to the next treasurer, everything will be recorded, what was spent, how much was, etc., etc. So you understand the importance of it. Now many of you, all you have to do is request money. I request the national, we have a debit card that they load the money on, and then we can use it as a debit card. But many times we don't know, and so you spend your own money, and you are supposed to submit a receipt. Now that receipt is so important that that's based on which you will get your reimbursement. So the example on the left, you see there are so many scratches, scribbling. That's not a good way to do it. The good way is to be the right one is not exactly very clear, but it should be clear, and you should have it in a PDF form, attach it to the forms that you sent to me, and then it's very easy. Like last time Richard did for his EarthX, it was so beautifully done. In one day I sent it, he sent it back to me, I sent it to, and the national got it, easy. But many times I keep pursuing, keep writing, no, this is not right, do it again. So please understand the importance of this. It's not for me. I don't have a single money, so make sure you follow directions. So ask me if you have confusion, and then please do it easily, nicely, so that I don't have to spend enough more time than is required. So that's my only request. Thank you. And
Yeah,
if you have any...
Oop, are you done? Okay, cool. I was going to give you a 1 minute warning. Sorry.
No, I'm done.
Okay, cool. Anybody? Yeah, thank you. Anybody have any questions? Jan, I think if your questions...
I didn't see the presentation advance. I just saw the title screen.
Yeah, I think that was for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't just you, Jan, don't worry. So yeah, basically, if you have something related to the chapter that you're spending money on, please contact Jashri before you do so she can kind of help facilitate that, because there's a lot of red tape involved when we get reimbursed. So just get with her before you need to do anything else, essentially. And please respond to her emails. Don't make her come after you. It's not fair to her, and it keeps you from getting your money faster. All right, Leah's going to take it away related to reimbursements about fundraising for the chapter. So Leah, go.
Well, thank you, Jashri. And I just want to briefly take 1 minute. So as Jashri mentioned, we're all volunteer. Even, we have different titles. We're all volunteers. And then I really appreciate some of you did donation after last month's chapter meeting. We really, really appreciate. As Jashri mentioned, any event that we approve to be done in the chapter, if there's any expenses involved, we'll try our best to reimburse you if there are funds in our chapter. So every single year, right, we have some routine expenses, like Zoom call like this, right, chapter, website maintenance, and when we do events, your registration fee, like specifically for EarthX, it's one of the most expensive one for nonprofit. So right now we're good in the chapter, but we're preparing for the second half of the year. So if you guys could, I would invite a little bit more donation. Again, none of us take any of the donation. These donations and funds all goes to, events, reimbursement, if we want to do another mural like we did last year, or funding some community project like GAF, if they need some funds to provide or to move forward or proceed with their own project. So this is another invitation for you to donate to our chapter. And if you are capable, go to our chapter website. It's climaterealitydfw.org. And then click the donation or contribute. I think it's contribute, sorry. Click on the contribute, and there's only one button in there. And all of your donation is tax deductible. And you will also get a really nice email from Joshua thanking you. That's my 1 minute. But yeah, thank you all so much. And we couldn't do this work without your manpower and without your donations.
Thank you, Leah. And related to that, if anybody has any expertise with fundraising for a nonprofit, or if you have any ideas for maybe some different fundraisers we could do, so we're not just asking y'all repeatedly to contribute, but if you know ways we can get other community members to contribute as well, please get with one of the executive committee, myself, Leah, Simon, Joshry, anybody else that's on the executive committee, because we would love to hear some ideas, because contrary to popular belief, none of us are trained in nonprofit management. So you got ideas, we're willing to listen to them. All right, so now update. Roger's going to be talking especially on some really great ideas coming up for the new members and for the educational committee. And then after that, I will be doing a legislation update. And then after that, we will have a closing community building event with Jeffrey, and then we will call it good. So thank you everybody for hanging out. But Roger, it's over to you now.
Thanks, Alex. I will try to go quickly. I'm going to share my screen. Let me just say first, especially for new people, the Education Committee focuses on programs to get new members involved quickly and to help all of our members gain new skills so that you can be active in more ways than you have been. So let me share my screen. And Alex, give me a thumbs up, please. You can see this slide. Okay,
I can see the slide. It's not full screened, but we can see it.
Well, I don't know. Oh, well, then I should enter full screen, shouldn't I?
If you want, I mean, we can see it, so it's whatever you want to do.
Well, let's do that. Let's do that. So
that works.
I love this slide for new members. Just so you know the history, Climate Reality was launched by former Vice President Gore in 2006, when he invited people to come to his farm in Tennessee to learn to give presentations based on his film that year, An Inconvenient Truth. And the first several trainings, this is the very first one, they were literally in the barn. So with the training coming up in Las Vegas, Nevada, which will have several thousand people, I'm sure, we've moved a long way from the barn on Al Gore's farm in Tennessee. But one of the things that we have learned over the last nearly 5 years now in the chapter is that the training program in and of itself is often not enough for most members. People have all kinds of reluctances about engaging with the public. But the reason that I have heard most frequently is, put very simply, I just don't feel like I know enough. So the Education Committee is providing workshops and discussion groups to try to speak to that felt sense of inadequacy. And I want to just list several categories quickly. In terms of presentations and conversations, I have already done one set of workshops on presentations this year so that people can feel like they've upgraded their skills beyond what they get in the training program. I will have another one coming out for people coming back from the Las Vegas training. If you're someone in this call already trained, but you've never given a presentation, you're more than welcome to plug into that training. And if Climate Reality does have a third training in the fall, it's still on the website, is to be determined. I don't know whether it's live or virtual, but I will do a third round of training for people who participate in that training program. Parallel to that, in terms of conversations, many of you saw Chip's overview earlier in a chapter meeting of his identity-based method of having conversations, especially with people who disagree with our point of view on climate. I was hoping that Chip was planning to do something like that overview again. He told me that at this point, what he would prefer is that people just watch the video of the presentation he made to the chapter. I'm going to drop a link to that video in the chat when I finish my remarks quickly, along with Chip's email address. If you're interested in that approach, get in touch with Chip. The second thing that the education group has already done, but ongoing, is launch a new group that's focused on writing. Another way to reach out to the public. Jayashri just mentioned the article, the op-ed kind of pieces she's writing. Letters to the editor, op-eds, articles, blog posts. So we've formed a group. Amy Hunt is heading that up now. If you're interested in acquiring more skills, or you just like to write and want to do that, please join this group. Amy is going to be putting out an invitation to the next meeting of the group fairly quickly, so watch for that announcement. The third thing that's going to be coming from the Education Committee is a workshop on crafting your personal climate story. There are a lot of groups that are giving more attention to this, not just Climate Reality. I'm attending a number of those workshops, and I'm going to try to bring that back to the chapter. But the new idea that came out of the executive committee this time is that we've noticed that the book club, which Jayashri leads, has been a very popular place for new members to kind of dip their toe into the chapter, introduce themselves, maybe have a comment about the book, but meet a lot of people. One problem is that our current book club only meets quarterly. So if you join the chapter on June 2nd, you're going to have to wait 3 months for the next book club meeting to come up. So the Education Committee is now going to, as an experiment, try having a kind of book of the month discussion. And I've made a decision about 2 books for that. So right now, the regular book club is reading this book, Regeneration by Paul Hawken. That discussion is coming up on the 1st of June. It's the first Wednesday of the month at 7:30. The Education Committee is then going to follow that up on the first Wednesday of July. That's the 6th of July, with Mark Bittman's book, Animal, Vegetable Junk, The History of Food from Sustainable to Suicidal. If it's not obvious to all of you why we should read a book about food, let me just quote something from the book we're reading in the book club now, Regeneration, where it says, today's food system has become the greatest cause of global warming, soil loss, chemical poisoning, rainforest destruction, and dying oceans. So as climate activists, we need to be up to speed on the food system. And then the first Wednesday evening of August, we're going to read Elizabeth Colbert's Under a White Sky. Many of you will know her from her Pulitzer Prize winning book back in 2015, The Sixth Extinction, that got a tremendous amount of attention. She's a great writer on science. This is an experiment. It's open to everybody in the chapter, but especially I want to extend this invitation to new members to come get involved, join the discussion. The last thing I want to mention, and I'll be done, Alex, is that we have had 2 previous book circles in this chapter around the text, All We Can Save, which articulates a feminist approach to climate activism. I'm very interested in forming a new circle sometime later this year, early fall, if possible. If you're at all interested in that, please be in touch with me. Be aware that that is a 10-week study program around All We Can Save, but we'll be doing that. So with that, I will stop sharing, Alex, and turn it back to you. Our goal is just to get everybody in the chapter learning in an ongoing way, and then get out there and take action. Oh, and one last thing, if you have ideas for this committee right now, it's me and Alex. and would love to have more participation on this committee. So please join us and bring your ideas. Okay, I'll drop Chip's info along with my email in the chat right now. I see
Thank you,
Jayashri
Roger.
here.
Yeah, Jayashri, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, and I'm sure Roger will agree with me, that along with the new book discussion group every month, even the older one is open to all members, even if you have not signed up, and you can show up even if you have not completed reading the book. Just because from the discussion, sometimes you can learn a lot and then you can contribute. So that was just a reminder.
Thank you. Yes, do not. I know that a lot of times with book clubs, you feel like if you haven't read the whole book, you can't go, but we encourage you to go even if you've read like the first page. You have something to share and you could learn. So, don't let that fear hold you back. Alrighty, so now I'm going to do a quick legislative update on some pieces of legislation that are currently at the national level. And then after that, we will close with our community building self-care segment. So the first one related to kind of what Roger was talking about is the Farm System Reform Act, HR 4421/S2332. And again, this will all be in the email that's coming out, so please don't feel like you have to remember that by any means. But like Roger was talking about, is the way that we do agriculture in the United States is not fantastic. It's really bad, to put it bluntly. It's really bad when it comes to, the effects on the climate, effects on the environment, effects on our own health, all of that stuff. And so this Farm System Reform Act the purpose is to stop new factory farm operations from being built and to stop existing factory farms from expanding, because the way that factory farms are set up, they're they prioritize efficiency, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of waste that's generated. It's bad for animal health. It's bad for our health. There's a lot of nutrient pollution that's associated with that, a lot of emissions that are associated with that. And so this bill really wants to enforce environmental laws on existing factory farms, including holding vertically integrated companies responsible for the pollution created by the animals that they own. If anybody's not aware, I think it's cows and sheep are responsible for a lot of methane emissions, which is not as frequent as carbon dioxide, but it is many, many times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so we really want to limit those methane emissions. So it would hold those companies responsible for that. And then it would also support the transition of existing factory farm operations to diversified operations that can serve more regional markets. So kind of trying to keep things a bit more local instead of these mass trucking, because then the transportation of the food also becomes an issue because that increases emissions as well. So that's that act that is currently, I believe it's still in the House and the Senate. Does anybody know? I think it's still out there. Cool. I'll do more research before I send out my email, but that's one to keep an eye on. And then the second one that Leah found was the National Climate Adaptation and Resilience Strategy Act. This is a bipartisan act that is being introduced. It was introduced back in January by senators, both Democratic and Republican senators, as well as House representatives from the Democratic and Republican parties as well. And so what this act would do is it would create a chief resilience officer position in the executive office of the president to improve the effectiveness of efforts to address climate vulnerabilities in the United States. So this would be achieved in part through establishment and oversight of interagency working groups and a council of non-federal partners focused on taking stock of existing federal operations, identification of challenges and barriers to building climate resilience, and design of a national strategy and implementation plan to address those shortcomings. So obviously I was reading that from a report that I found, but long story short, it would create a position in the office of the presidential administration in order to identify where the issues are with adapting to climate change, and then taking that information and kind of figuring out, okay, well, now what do we do about it? So it would be a really key position and crucial, not only to actually start taking steps to address climate change and climate mitigation and climate adaptation, but also to, make it more normalized at the legislative level. And so again, I'll be sending out an email later with more information about both of those and about how you can take action and like who you can contact and all of that stuff. So keep an eye out from that. Thank you everybody for hanging out with us so far. And now we're just going to take a couple minutes to close with our community building and from there, we will call it a day. And if you do have more questions, the executive committee will stick around for a few minutes. So if you want to hang out with us and say hi. But Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to make this as brief as I can. It's a portion of a prose poem from the book Silt by Aurora Levins Morales. Some of you may be familiar. It's called Braided Prayer. Some of us want to burn up the world sooner than share it, in the ironclad belief that there is not enough of anything, hoarding up life that withers when it's pulled apart like that, cursed to never feel sated, continuing to insist there is no consequence even as it knocks on the door. Some of us are all awake, feel each blow, our hearts like drums beating hard day and night, putting bodies and words in the path of unthinking greed, singing, keep it in the ground, singing, water is life. Water is really, truly life, singing life, painted banners flying. Some of us doze in the shallows of comfort, unable to open our eyes, listening to the same song over and over, unable to make ourselves look on a future of smoking ruin. And so we never see the gardens in the smoke, putting one foot in front of the other, planning as if there is no precipice because we can't imagine there is anything to be done. There is the land where the water rises right to the edges of our mouths and we either flee or become amphibious. And there is the land where the leaves parch into tinder waiting for the spark and the offshore winds to blow through miles of dry underbrush and turn trees into torches, houses into charcoal skeletons. And there is the land of spinning storms that can shatter cement, blow blunt objects right through walls, and drive the sea all the way to the foothills. In one place, the people pray for rain. In another, they pray for dry land. In a third, they pray for still skies and a different storm path. What if we could braid our prayers? Not my drought, your flood. Not let this storm curve into your part of the map instead of mine. What if all the prayers became breath, became the one word, listen. Again, that's a song from the book Silt by Aurora Levins Morales. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Can someone find that real quick and drop it in the chat if anybody wants to revisit that? One of our, I don't know, executive committee or something, but we'll do that. Anyways, thank you on behalf of the chapter. Thank you everybody for showing up today for our chapter meeting. I believe our next one is June 18th, right guys? Same time, every third Saturday at 10 a.m. Thank you so much for your time. I hope all of you have a great, if not slightly stormy, Saturday afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or hang out for a couple minutes. But this is your pass to leave. So thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, new members.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you,
everyone.
guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Great meeting. Hey, can I ask a question, Alex or Lee?